Thanks for tuning in. Looking forward to the second episode of Windows on the World Live. We just decided live 2 minutes ago that would be a great title. Why change a good thing? And there you go. On we go. Last week we was talking about political correctness, taking offence, and the controlling of the narrative that we do ourselves with those actions. And we're quite keen to continue it this week. We got a pod as well from a couple of weeks back that was very relevant. Mark did mention it last week. It was about oh, go on, Mark. What was it about? It's gone out of my head again. Sound bites. What was it?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, last week we looked at how things are controlled psychologically. And we're really in an era of psychological warfare, and we have been for quite some time, but the social engineers now are using techniques in just about every area of our lives. And we looked at the manipulation that's gone on in most of this century through organisations such as the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is very much tied to the British Psychological Association. And we've been going through that on Chuck's show as well. Last week we were talking about one of the biggest weapons which has come out of this, which is political correctness, which is a fear-based mind control strategy which is used to shut down free speech and to keep people in fear. In fact, it's probably the most dangerous psychological tool of our era.
Agreed. It was echo chambers. That was what I was fishing for and couldn't find. But he was.
Oh yes, the echo chamber. We're going to play a pod this week, which was a show we recorded a while ago, and it's called Fake News Media Echo Chamber Exposed, and it was about a document that was produced by Demos, which is a think tank which is directly related to the Psychological Association and, of course, Tavistock. It's a change agent organisation, and several years ago we had interactions with them at Goldsmith College. Quite interesting, because they produced a paper about the unreality of conspiracy theory, how we engage, in other words, with people who are conspiracy theorists, how we deprogram them from these beliefs, and how we talk about these things rationally. What they didn't expect was a room. They organised this debate at Goldsmiths, and what they didn't expect was a room full of highly intelligent, rational people. And they could not actually argue. It was very, very interesting. They were very good at steering and using psychology. But when it came to the facts of 9/11, they knew nothing. All they could repeat was the official narrative. And that was taken apart by someone who's on the show we're going to play tonight, Kevin Boyle, who's a physics teacher. And he completely slaughtered their argument. And this is where I learned that they also use the rule of three a lot. We talked about this. So you'd get it framed like, oh, I suppose you think the American government did 9/11. I suppose you think that man-made climate change isn't happening. And I bet you think that Elvis has his brain on the moon in a jar. These are the sort of things that they frame it into, and that's what we're going to talk about, the psychology behind all this stuff. It's very, very interesting, and how we defeat the social engineers, because the way we defeat them is actually with common sense.
Yes, common sense. We need the right tools, don't we? We need to be able to identify the tactics that are being used against us and find the right tools to fight against those in a peaceful but positive and forward-moving manner. And I think that's what we're going to try and do over the next few weeks, is get those tools together, or at least point people in the right direction to find those tools, and get out there and identify this. One of the other things you spoke about last week, but just briefly, was the Delphi technique, which is used in many meetings. Now, to those people that go out there and attend their local I don't know, council meetings or whatever it might be, about a planning meeting or something like that, then if you listen to what Mark's got to say about the Delphi and do your own research on how that's done, then you've got the tool to identify that in a meeting and to tell the people sitting next to you, or as many of them who listen to you, exactly what's going on there and how to go out and find that research so that they can look into it for themselves, and then they won't be able to use those tactics on people.
Well, it's very interesting, because the way around that is to have a number of people dotted around the room, which is their strategy. Delphi technique basically came out of the Rand Corporation in the 50s. It's a way of gaining corporate consensus. So if you're looking at it from a corporate point of view, the last thing you want is dissent in meetings or even board meetings. It doesn't matter. You just don't want dissent within the corporation. So what you do is you have a narrative which you want to impose, and you steer people into that narrative. It's a bit like sales about closing doors. Well, we've got a red one and a blue one. Oh, but the blue one won't be until next week. And this is the way it goes. They're basically closing doors. So they're shutting off your options as they go along. At the beginning, they say, we want to engage with you. We want to hear what you've got to say. That's why we're here. Then they split the group up into smaller groups, and they have a facilitator on each table. Now, it can work in several ways. For instance, in a council meeting, it would work in the way that it did in Southwark. We went to one recently. I was with Piers Corbyn, and Piers is great at those meetings because he said, enough of this. We want ballots. We want ballots. And he sort of tries to raise a bit of opposition within the room. But I don't think even he was aware of how psychologically subversive the Delphi technique is, because I described what was going to happen before we got there. And guess what? It happened. My name's Rob. I'm your facilitator. My name's John. I'm your co-facilitator. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through what you want. We're going to find out, we're going to put you into groups, and we're going to write down all of the things that you feel you would like to see in a local community. Of course, none of this stuff goes anywhere. It all goes in the bin. Then they come back with, well, we can't give you that, but we can give you this. And the this that they're going to give you is that they wanted to give you in the first place. It's basically a way of shutting down choice. But it's worse than that, because it's psychologically worked out. So what they're doing is they're using psychological warfare techniques against people in the room who may disagree. So they've worked it out scientifically. They know how to identify who's going to be a problem. So what they then do is they will agitate that person until that person gets angry. And then they will start saying, well, calm down. Everyone else is having a reasonable debate here. Why can't you? You seem to have an anger issue. This is the sort of basic psychological techniques that are used. And say within Occupy, what they did with Occupy or a big group, they'll go in, they'll bring in a facilitator, and that facilitator will turn everything into basic sloganeering. But with Occupy, it was much more sinister, because what they did was they sent people into each group. They split the group up into about 12 groups, I think, and they sent people in who were there to subvert each group and then turn each group onto the other group. So they start whispering campaigns, such as, well, you know that guy over there, I think he works for the police. No, I've been hearing that. And this is basically the undercover police that are doing it. That's the ironic thing. And when you find out how this stuff works, it's a template. It can be spotted anywhere. And the great news is that this has been going for the last 100 years. And when you look at warfare techniques, battle techniques, it's been going on thousands of years, so they can't really change the template. They can only use certain psychological tools. Now, once you're outside that paradigm, then you are immune to their psychological tools. The problem is that most people are easily sucked in and fall victim to it pretty much straight away.
Yeah, so are they using the 4 Ds in there then? Deny, degrade, destruct, and deceive? Sounds like
yes.
it.
Yes, definitely. They're all used. And the denigration of people is one of the main things. And that's really the biggest tool in the box. When you look at how they denigrate people, even on LBC or whatever. Oh, so you think that the American government did 9/11? Well, yeah, you probably also think that there's golf courses on the dark side of the moon. You know, this is the sort of stuff that they do. So what they do is they associate what you've said with something which to them is preposterous. And I'm going to go into a paper tonight, which will run nicely alongside the podcast, which is on the British Psychological Association website. And the paper is called Reclaiming the Truth. Could psychology hold the key to moving beyond a post-truth world? Now, we discussed this in slight detail before, but what I've done is gone through everything they say and take it apart and use their psychology back against them. But the psychology that I'm using is all about truth, whereas theirs is based on propagandized lies. And this is where it gets really interesting, because if you use natural law and truth, these people are stumped because it's not in their vocabulary. We have to remember that social engineering and psychology came out of psychological warfare. These people who did it were very clever. But conversely, and I think this is important, it's just something that I've thought of. I was doing some shows out in Portugal, and there was a promoter out there who had come from a very aristocratic family. And we were talking about all this stuff. And he goes, God, it's great that you know about this. He said, because most people are totally unaware. We're going to have some great conversations over the weekend. And we did. And it turns out he was related into the Huxleys. And their view of things is very different from the average person. And we have to see both sides here. That these people thought they were doing the best for everybody. But of course, they were going to remain the elite because they were cleverer than the rest of the population. That's really what it's about. It comes out of eugenics as well. And an assumption of superiority. And not all these people are evil. Far from it. They're not. In fact, a lot of these people have been completely marginalized in the globalist sphere of things and by certain groups themselves. So it's not as clear cut as people think. But when I was talking about this stuff and Huxley's and Brave New World and the predictions of the technological society, basically the post-truth society, the things that he was coming back with were quite logical. But underneath it all, there's a ruthlessness that most people can't really get their heads around because they don't think like that. These people had an agenda and they believed it was the best thing. And in some ways, you can't really blame them. It's like we were saying last week. We have to take responsibility. It's us who are doing it to ourselves. No one's doing it to us. They're leading us into it and we're going in like a bunch of sheep. And that's all that there is to it. It's quite simple, really.
Yep, we're complying. By even when you say nothing and just get on with your life, that's tacit agreement, that's compliance, that is a contract that you're forming just by staying shut up. So Jack's saying...
Well, that's right, and that brings us on to something you said last week about not voting. By not voting, you're acquiescing, you're giving up your rights. Whether you believe that the voting's a good thing or not, you're basically acquiescing. So that's acquiescence. So you're saying that the status quo is fine, I accept it. So what you have to do is actively oppose it. But the way to actively oppose it can be in a passive way, because we're talking about psychology here. We're not talking about someone who's going to come round and shoot you. We're not talking about bailiffs who are going to take your property. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something much more important to the social engineers, and that's your mind. Your property is not important. It's not important to you, really. People get attached to property because they've been led to believe that they can own property. And under natural law, you can't own anything. And it's stupid and ridiculous to think that you can. How can you own anything? You can't. You're not here for long enough. Your house is going to be left to someone else when you're gone. You have use of certain types of property. And in return, the state wants you as their property. So all of the stuff about property and consent is interwoven with this later psychological engineering of society, because what they're doing is they're using your weaknesses against you. Oh, I might lose something. Oh, I've got everything to gain and nothing to lose. It's a rat race. Everyone's out to get what they can. And that's the deception. That is what the social engineers have introduced to keep you on a hamster wheel. And these people are clever. The reason they're clever is because everyone's doing it and it works.
Yeah, that's a path we was, I think, originally brought down, or certainly in recent times, by Edward Bernays, and I won't go into detail with him because people can check him out for themselves, and I know most of our listeners are well aware of what part he played in the controlling of our mindset and moving us from things of value and things that counted into a world that is post-truth, and it's also just fully kind of material and worthless, and people have traded everything of worth for cheap Chinese crap and a new car.
That's basically it. And of course, people say, oh, well, I watch television, but I've got my own mind. Well, if you watch it for any length of time, you haven't.
No.
Because you have to be completely self-aware whenever you watch television. And that's why I never liked it as a kid. It used to make me angry. I used to walk out of the room and I could watch things that were just entertainment. But when there was something under the surface, I could kind of spot it. And I also hated the look of everyone's faces in the room when they were watching television. They looked as though they were under some kind of control.
Whoa.
And it completely removed conversation. And it distracts people, even when there's one on. If you go around to someone's house, because I haven't got a television, I don't go anywhere near them. But it doesn't even matter if people aren't really watching it. It's still distracting them. So it's a great tool of distraction, even if you're not watching it, even if it's on, because nothing of any value is coming out of it.
Yeah, I like the actual breakdown of the name itself, television or Tell-Live-Vision, you know, and it sends you out programs, it programs you, that's what it does. There's many people out there that spend the time and do some investigating and researching into nutrition and stuff like that, and they'll go about the business of detoxifying our body. Well, when you stop watching television and you stop reading those garbage newspapers, you'll detoxify your mind. And you'll find that it's hard. It's not that easy to do for many people. I never really had much of a problem with it. I wasn't a great fan for many years. But once you've detoxified your mind, you look at them again and you see them all in a completely different light. And that's because you haven't had that influence, that programming. You're reprogramming your own mind with your own thoughts for a while. And you can then be a little bit more critical of those institutions that you've grown to think are part of your family. And the BBC would be the main one that I'd like to point you to, which is so far removed from what people perceive it to be that it's quite shocking to me that so few have actually woken up to it, and so many still actually go about the business of paying a licence fee to those people that I see as... well, criminals. I'll keep it, clean. Criminals.
Well, yeah, and it's a big gravy train they're all on. It's an insulated world, the BBC. I've been there a few times. I've met some of the producers there years ago when I was working on television stuff. And they all have something in common. There's something missing from them. There's something that is not healthy about the whole setup. They seem to have this internal weakness. It's very, very strange. That's my experience of it. And, of course, the people who watch television are being treated like children. If you read anything even from 40 or 50 years ago, or go back a bit further, go back to the late 1800s and look at vocabulary and look at the complexity of writing, and then listen to BBC or Sky News, and you will feel extremely insulted and know that you are being patronised.
Yep, they do. They treat people like children. I'm not sure who it was I was speaking to the other day. I don't know whether it was you, it might have been Jack, or possibly somebody else, but they were saying, and I was agreeing, that the content is not the programming, it's not the sport you're watching or the drama, it's actually the adverts and the things that are going on in between all of that content. that is your real content, that the information that they're trying to program you with. So I agree to that to a large extent, but you still get quite a lot of programs, especially those that are documentary style, that are way off kilter, way off the mark when it comes to the truth and the reality of the situation that they're trying to get across to you. But because people's seen it there, they take it, as gospel. They're going to preach that. They're going to fight for that position, no matter what, without doing any research of their own, without investigating it.
Well, what I found was that when you look at network documentaries, they recap every time that there's an advert break. So they take a few minutes to tell you what you've just been watching, in case you've forgotten. And they lead you into this non-story. And a lot of them pose a question: is it possible? And then you get to the end and you think, what was that actually about? Because there was no conclusion. They often ask a question in these sort of things and never actually answer it. And that is really what television is. It's like purgatory. You're actually waiting for something, and you could be there forever and it'll never happen. And that's what they're actually doing. They're putting in expectation, but that expectation is never fulfilled. I'm not talking about drama here, because that's obviously written. That's written to be a story. That's a different thing. I'm talking about when they convey information, especially network channels like National Geographic, when they try and do stuff about mysteries or shipwrecks and conspiracies. They are the worst kind of documentary, really, and they're the most prevalent on cable TV. But then you're getting into an area where it really is truly worthless. And I actually watch Sky News because it's great to see what they're pumping out. It's actually very, very informative, because once you read between the lines, you can tell exactly what's really going on. And the presenters on there are particularly dim. And that's what I think television is really about. When you get people who work for the BBC, they're under this illusion that because they went to Oxford or Cambridge and worked for the BBC, that they have a superior insight into what's going on. And usually they are the most clueless people around. A friend of mine's actually working at the BBC at the moment as a cameraman, and he was saying it's hilarious. He said you just wouldn't believe it. And that basically one of the presenters on there has got handlers. They've got like handlers around them telling them what to do, what to think, all the time.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I've heard similar things at other networks as well. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, okay. So again, at the risk of repeating ourselves to a lot of our usual listeners who will be well aware of the power of the mainstream media and what it does, this is part of the controlling of the narrative that people need to understand. It's one of the tools used against you to stop you thinking for yourself. So we needed to bring it in there at some point. And the next thing that strikes me as following on from that would be sport. Because many people, and including myself some years ago, used to have a TV package in order to just watch sport or documentaries as well. I used to watch as well, wildlife ones and that, but mainly I got it because I wanted to watch football and boxing. And I used to be a big snooker fan. I'd watch rugby as well, and I'd watch the cricket, really enjoy it. I'd watch the tennis when it come round and think, oh, that was great. But what I noticed about my sport was when Sky TV took over, way back there, I think it was just before one of the big Frank Bruno world title fights, we was all busting to get Sky sorted out in one of my pals' houses. And so we're way back in time. But at that point, I thought most sport was all pretty good still, although boxing had pretty much going by the wayside, or heavyweight boxing was, in terms of corruption and not getting what you was expecting from the results. But when Sky came along, they changed the face of snooker and football and rugby and cricket and tennis, one after the other, and it became it became about those involved in the sport rather than the sport itself. Snooker would be a great example. I grew up watching that as a kid on Pot Black and really loved it. My granddad played snooker down the club, and I thought, what a nice thing to be doing. And it was an interesting thing to watch if you like that sort of thing. But they completely changed it when it went over to Sky. It became about Stephen Hendry and where he's been going, who he's been associating with, tournament earnings and all these interruptions. I got to miss a lot of snooker while hearing all about Hendry or whoever else it was at the time. And they put a load of money into it. And that seems to have had a knock-on effect to kids, where now we've got a lot of kids that just seem to want a celebrity lifestyle. And I believe that this commercialisation of sport had a large part to play in that, because it brought a lot of people into homes as rich, well-to-do people, that you might want to be like, and passed those inspirations on to a whole generation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're talking about the distraction principle and corporatisation. Basically, it comes down to that. And I suppose previously you could actually concentrate on the actual sport itself, but now it's a sideshow. There's lots of sideshows there. But getting into what we're going to talk about tonight, because we're going to play this podcast, which was one of our shows, Fake News Media Echo Chamber Exposed. It was a paper that came out of Demos. And it was to do with the fact that they think it's a fact, that people in alternative media or outside the mainstream controlled narrative are really just speaking to their own little groups. And this is a very bad thing, because they're not getting any other information. So again, it's typical psychological warfare, patronising garbage. So we did a show on it. But what was important about that paper was that a few days after it was written, it was all over. They had people from Demos, these trendy-looking young guys coming in, talking all about echo chambers. And the next thing is, you've got the LBC presenters using it. The echo chamber. You're just in your own echo chamber. You're in your own. And people were phoning up saying, well, actually, you're the echo chamber. And that's what this show's about. So maybe we should get into that show and come back with some more stuff about psychological warfare and what we can do about it.
Yep, that sounds great. But before I do it, that button on our 19 minutes and 30 seconds worth of pod, I'm just going to say a quick hello to my sister, Lisa, Jimmy and Joe and Jack, and a big apology, because I was meant to have gone there today down in Brighton, but I made that arrangement and I completely forgot that my Sunday evenings were now busy doing this, so I do apologise, and I'll get there very, very soon. And thanks for everyone for listening. Thanks to the new people in the chat. I did notice one, Julian, in there earlier, and we'll catch you on the other side of this pod. Cheers, Mark. Cheers, everybody.
All right, Tony. Welcome to Windows on the World. Now, we have covered the fake news agenda, those controlling the narrative. Today we're going to talk about public policy think tanks, and in particular Demos, who've just released a new paper. We've had quite a lot of interaction with Demos over the years. They've produced many different papers, and I want to outline today how fast this stuff gets into the media. So a paper is produced, the next thing, it's all over your mainstream media, and it's instructing and controlling and nudging the public into how to think. So, from their website, it says Demos is Britain's leading cross-party think tank. The paper that they've just produced is called Talking to Ourselves, Political Debate Online and the Echo Chamber Effect. Now, on their website, before we get into this, it states, we produce original research, publish innovative thinkers, and host thought-provoking events. We have spent 20 years at the centre of the policy debate with an overarching mission to bring politics closer to people. What they mean is socially engineering, steering and nudging society through all the available media outlets, with really a bunch of change agents at the helm. Now,
It also carries on here. Demos has always been interested in power, how it works and how to distribute it more equally throughout society. So here we're getting the diversity effect, the programming, all the change agents speak. And it says also, alongside quantitative research, Demos pioneers new form of deliberative work from citizens' juries and ethnography to groundbreaking social media analysis. Demos is an independent educational charity, and if you believe the propaganda, then you might want to buy some seaside property in Switzerland, but a lot of people actually do believe this propaganda. So this echo chamber, this paper that they produced, is now in the mainstream media. Within days of the paper being produced, it was all over Sky TV, BBC News, and if you listen to LBC, which is a London-based radio station, you'll hear them stating echo chamber all the time. What they're saying in this paper is that people who are more polarised in their political views are more likely to just interact with each other. Well, that's kind of obvious, but underneath all this is what they're trying to do is by nudging people into certain patterns of thought. So it carries on their website with the echo chamber, the propaganda paper that they've produced. It states within this paper, which you can download actually from the internet, it says there are a lack of gatekeepers and editorial control, anonymity, pseudo-sites, and of course, echo chambers. The long-term effects of the echo chamber effect aren't yet known, but there are early indications that they threaten the health of our democracies. Polarisation of political opinion is on the rise. Some have placed this at the doorstep of echo chambers. So here we've got all this neuro-linguistic programmed speech coming in. Now, all mainstream media outlets, as we've said, have featured this echo chamber, and what they're trying to do is say that people are forming these groups and they're being misinformed, so the mainstream has to inform them. So it's really a panic about the fake news agenda, which has now been exposed, and I think it's kind of come on the back of that. But it says here, politically engaged Twitter users are more likely to interact with others who support the same party and share articles from publications which match their beliefs, confirming the existence of online echo chambers. Can you see how clever all this is? Unless you take it apart. They think it's clever, but once you learn how this stuff works, and if you look at anything from your local council, then you will find this kind of double speak, news speak, 1984 kind of programmed language. So they're basically telling you that all is you're going to experience within your own groups are echo chambers. Now, obviously, they're trying to get out of the fact that people have found out about fake news, and fake news has backfired massively. It says, if the trend for using digital channels as tools to form and share beliefs continues, the echo chamber effect may represent a significant challenge to democracy. Well, there you go. That's really what they're saying there, is that they have to control the narrative because they feel as though they're losing it. That does come out when you read this document, which is extremely long. I wouldn't actually recommend anyone going through it because it's mind-numbingly boring. But if you just read the opening paragraphs and what they're trying to say, it will give you an insight into how the narrative is being controlled, or how these people believe they are controlling the narrative. So that's a new paper by Demos, and we're going to be talking about that today. It's called Talking to Ourselves, the Political Debate Online and the Echo Chamber Effect. Welcome to Windows on the World. I'm talking to Kevin Boyle, and we're going to talk about this new paper, The Echo Chamber Effect from Demos. Now, I thought it was important that we bring this up because this echo chamber effect has gone all through the mainstream media, and Kevin interacts with mainstream media quite a lot. In fact, he talks to LBC, which is a London-based station, quite regularly and often gets shut down. So, Kevin, welcome to Windows on the World.
Hello, Mark.
Yeah, I've listened to some of your interactions with some of the people on LBC, and I think this Demos paper it totally proves that they're getting a script from above.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
As you say, the themes are just repeated.
Yeah.
By numerous presenters. They go with this echo chamber theme, the fake news theme, and it all kind of happens together, and it's presented hour after hour, like successive shows, about 3 hours long, and you'll get the same topic debated, on each show, like 3 or 4 times in a day, basically pushing the same theme, but covertly. It's normally hidden behind a question. I mean, an excellent example is Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
Is Jeremy Corbyn failing? Is Jeremy Corbyn mad? Is he finished? Is Labour going to die forever? Everything's framed in this kind of way, as if it's a kind of an impartial discussion about what's happening with the Labour Party. In fact, it's just really an attack on the Corbyn leadership. So
it's controlling the narrative, isn't it? So what they're doing is they're framing it as a question, but it's really a statement.
It's a statement,
yeah.
And that's how it works.
Yeah.
And we had Demos down in first about LBC. They've actually taken clips from a couple of my interviews and used them as adverts for the shows because it's a bit controversial. But they edit them to make the presenter look good, and they don't include the kind of thing that people like me, and there are quite a few like me, who actually just ring up to say, listen, enough of this stuff. It's all about making their own narrative look like it's winning, but it isn't often, which is the encouraging thing. Often, often these things don't work. I mean, the fake news and the other thing, the echo chamber. Yeah. People are just ringing up and saying, actually, you're the fake news and you're the echo chamber. And this is like, people get it now.
Yeah, so I think so. The reason I brought this up is because of the speed that it went into the media. Yeah. So it's absolute proof that these think tanks like Demos are basically controlling the narrative, and these are meant to be a charity. They describe themselves as a charity, that they're working with people. They're empowering people. Of course they are. Like your local council is empowering you with diversity. I mean, LBC, there was several of them using this echo chamber thing as though they'd been taken into a room and said, here's what you've got to talk about.
Well, maybe they have,
Yeah.
Maybe they have. Maybe that's it. Maybe these people get trained. Another technique that's very regularly used is they seem to come on the show with fixed questions that they will demand an answer to of any member of the public who's getting difficult.
Yeah.
For instance, with the Putin thing, I remember once it was like a lot of people were defending Putin and Russia and Trump's idea of peace with Russia. A lot of people thought it was a good idea, and that Majid guy, anyway,
the Asian presenter,
the Asian guy, Nawaz, he kept coming in with, do you think it's a good thing that Putin interfered directly in the Scottish referendum? He presented that as a fact, and he demanded an answer to that question.
Yes, as though it was a fact. Yeah.
He was trying to give you a kind of nowhere to go, and just trap people
Close
with
question.
something that condemned them or contradicted themselves. It's just technique, it's just like silly stuff that they've been told to do. I mean, once you see them doing it time and time again, they've been told to do it. They've been trained for this stuff. They're change agents. They are, just exactly what they appear to be, which is establishment shills, really. That's what it comes down to. Now, it's not working, so that's good.
I think it is good, but let's go back now to this interaction with Demos a few years ago, where there was this guy, Jamie Bartlett, who was their big spokesman at the time. He came along with this guy, Carl Miller, and he'd written this paper called The Unreality of Conspiracy Theories, and they got a bit of a hammering, really, didn't they?
Well, see, the technique is, there is terrific manners, very nice man, lovely bloke, the manners were fantastic. And it was about talking reasonably about how, not about the events themselves, but how we discuss the events. And the thing is, they wouldn't go to the actual events themselves. And when we insisted that we just talk about what's true about the thing, they lost. They couldn't defend anything. They didn't. I'm not even sure they knew anything about it, to be honest. Had they studied it? No. So this is an operation. It's like And this is how the whole society works, Mark. You know this. I know it. If you're in any job in the society, if you're a teacher, if you're in any industry, for NHS, doesn't matter what it is, you realise eventually that no one within the structure of this society that you know is making any decisions at all. Yeah. Everything's coming from the headmaster in the school decides nothing anymore other than trivial things about people's careers. He doesn't decide what goes on or what's taught or what the syllabus is, and just teachers decide nothing. There's no more staff meetings anymore. You get consultants brought in to tell you what you're going to be doing. There's no participation in our own lives anymore. That's what's going on, and everything's coming from above, from these think tanks. And it's just guiding everybody, and they're presumably being told what to do by some Tavistocks or some City of London people or something. Yeah. And at the end of the day, people are sitting there beginning to realise this and saying, how come our kids can't afford a place to live? How come all the jobs are shit, How come there's nothing worth out there for our children? And people are starting to wake up to what's being done to them. Yeah. And it's all coming from remote authority. Remote authority is what we have to start saying no to, Yeah. That's it.
Absolutely. I mean, this paper goes into quite some detail, this echo chamber paper, but basically it's about how big sites link into other sites, and they give all these groups of media. Interestingly, they have quite a few of what they would term to be alternative media outlets like Infowar and BuzzFeed, which we know are not really alternative media, but they've lumped them in. But they've got the BBC, The Guardian, Independent, Telegraph, Daily Mail, Mirror, Express, Sky News, FT.com, Standard, Breitbart, Bloomberg, Huffington Post, New Statesman, Canary, Metro, Economist, Labour List and Wings Over Scotland, but they missed out completely RT. I think that this echo chamber thing I thought was really important to get out to the public, because it shows you that these think tanks are hand in hand with the mainstream media. As soon as they produce a paper, it's on there. It's something that they're telling you that is happening in your life, and you've got to sort it out, because your narrative is being exploited by people who are getting you to think differently.
Yeah, and what people also need to do is to recognise that within their own environment, it's about time they started saying no to authority. They started to stop collectively committing suicide, cultural and economic suicide, that is leaving their kids in the place that we can all see they're going. I mean, people need to stop taking orders. Which is what we're conditioned to do, what the whole system is conditioned to do.
We've covered this with our article, Big Society Change Agents. That's how everything around you is manufactured by these people who are brought into... they're not brought into your lives, they're brought into your area. This is actually geographical. They bring them into your area. So your local council now, there's nobody that's accountable there. And this is really about lack of accountability, isn't it? The whole thing is that you've got nowhere to turn.
It's the same thing. It's external directives, which are coming from the UN. I mean, you cover this. Yeah. Agenda 21 now, Agenda 2030. And actually, if you compare that to the Communist Manifesto, the 12 planks of that, you might put them up, Mark. Yeah. It's what is being implemented right here, right now. And the cultural Marxism goes with that. And if people don't know, they must educate themselves. I mean, can I just say this?
Yes.
The whole point about Marxism, and actually really about any authoritarian system, is the way that it hijacks our God-given natural, ethical and moral instincts and puts them in service of their system of power. And that, it sadly went for the Catholic Church as much as anyone. It's what cultural Marxism particularly does. The people at the bottom are sincere. They do not want racism, which is a bad thing. They want more equality. The Soviets wanted more equality. It's what the thing was sold on. And what you get in the end is a concentration of power at the very top and complete tyranny. So it's the intention of the people leading these kind of these political authoritarian, the various types of political movements that there are, that is the problem. All the good intentions are at the bottom, and all the wicked intentions are with the authoritarians at the top. And they are so clever that they know how to manipulate us into doing what they want for their interests, and actually destroying the interests of ourselves and our own kids. This is what's going on.
Yeah. But it's the one-dimensional aspect of all this that's so easy. Once you know how it works, it's a busted template, isn't it? And that's what I keep trying to get over, that once this kind of language and this approach is known, it's like the Delphi technique that's used to control every public meeting when we went to the regeneration meetings in London, which is happening all over the place. It's the same technique. It's gaining this assumed group consensus, and people walk out thinking, well, that's not what I agreed to, and they don't understand it because it's psychological warfare. That's actually what it is. It's and this is, again, does tie into the Communist Manifesto. They destroy the minds of the people. That's really important. You have to destroy the minds of the people to reconstruct them into this new paradigm, destroy private property, destroy the family, and basically make the state super powerful. And that's what we're seeing. This is why we got into this years ago, was looking at how, say, the legal system, the court system, and everything around was being corporatized to the extent where there's no rule of law, and nobody is above the golden rule of law, and that's what we have to hold these people accountable for. So these people like Demos are manipulating people's minds into an agenda that is not in their interest.
Well, millions of people are now beginning to understand this stuff, and I think I would agree with a guy called Mark Passio, whose work I watch quite a lot, that we need to stop blaming them and start blaming ourselves for our response to this stuff.
Absolutely.
We have to say, hey, take responsibility, oppose what's going on in your own environment, join up with people around you, and actually become active. And people don't know how to do that. But these kind of things, I think there has been a massive awakening in the public. But I think this is the next step.
Yeah. That
people will organise against the thing that we know is making war on us. It's war against the public, it's war against our society, and it's coming from the authority within, unfortunately.
Yeah, just want to finish off with this. Now, this should hopefully get you hopping mad. Here's a little quote, and they're talking really here about you, the thinking public. It states, the number and resilience of conspiracy theories are on the rise. Users are still struggling to distinguish truth and lies on the web. And anecdotal evidence suggests the proliferation of fabricated news stories is also accelerating. Yes, watch the BBC any day of the week and you'll see fabricated stories that are indeed accelerating. So that's that paper. It's a Demos paper. You can download it off the internet, and it's called the Echo Chamber Effect. It's called Talking to Ourselves, Political Debate Online and the Echo Chamber Effect. So there they are, patronising you, the public, and nudging and steering you into group consensus. So that's it for this part of the show. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Let me pause that because we don't need the second half of that pod. Interesting stuff, Mark. I picked up a few points on that. That's probably the third time I've listened to it, so I should have by now. And one of the really interesting things that I'd like to talk about, especially as I know that I've got family listening to this that are in this kind of situation, is that kids don't seem to have any hope. They don't seem to have any future at the minute, and they're stuck in there living with their parents. The chances of them getting out into a flat or a home of some sort have become so remote now that many of them have kind of given up hope on it. And I read something recently about Italy, where the average age now that a child is able to leave home and get their own place is 35 years old. And obviously this is going to have a massive impact on families right across the country, or even the world by the looks of it.
Well, absolutely. It's creating a complete dependence culture and taking away aspiration. Now, what is aspiration? Aspiration is having hope. And hope is something that actually is something that could happen in the future. So you're hoping for something, and they've even taken that away. So the aspiration is much more important, because aspiration is what drives you. You have to have some kind of drive to do something. And what they're doing is they're removing that. And a lot of this, I think, is down to creating mental illness within society. And people would say, why do they want to create mental illness within society? Because mentally ill people are very easy to manipulate and put on drugs and control. And this is not about finance. It's not. We know how the financial system works, and those who don't should study it, because that's a very important thing as well. So it's not about finance. It's about control. And according to the United Nations, there are too many people on the planet. The whole of this agenda of diversity, empowerment, LBGT rights. I saw the other day something quite shocking. An 8-year-old boy parading himself with a load of homosexuals as a drag queen in a club, and his parents were proud of him. So he's wiggling like a little girl. So basically they're bringing paedophilia into it as well. And this is going on. You wouldn't have believed this could happen 20 years ago, but they're degrading things very, very quickly for a very good reason. And the stupid and idiotic part of the public who go along with it are just working towards their own mental illness and enslavement. That's all they're doing. So by embracing diversity and all these things that are destroying the minds of the young and taking away all their aspiration, they're creating a lot of frustration. And this is what they want. It's chaos. And when they say order out of chaos, this is really what they mean, because the people who think this stuff up are remote. It doesn't affect them. They believe themselves to be the state. So engineering financial and social chaos is just one of the protocols. That's what they want to do.
Exactly. Money is one of those things that you don't learn anything about at school, but all of your life you're going to desire, need or want it one way or another. And most people, unfortunately, will go to their graves and they'll never know what money is. And they won't even know their own name in most circumstances. They'll have no idea of the world that they live in. They just have this illusion, this perspective that was built up from all of these false controlled narratives and all these methods that are used to apply them onto you. And if you think I've gone crazy and I'm talking nonsense, well, go and do your own research, because I never ask anyone to take my word for anything, and I don't think Mark does either. We're encouraging you to go out there and check for yourself. Find out what money is. Find out what a legal title is, what an actual name is, what your straw man is. And from there you'll have some understanding of the illusion that you've lived in for your entire life.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the sort of, jump out of the matrix, because that whole idea of that matrix thing to me is another mental trap. It's another artificial womb, because anything that's being pushed your way and they say it's an escape route is generally another trap. And that may sound incredibly paranoid, but when you look at how well this stuff is worked out, it's not. So let's go into this document. This should make people's blood boil as well, because it's all about psychology and written by 3 psychologists. It took 3 of them to write this paper. And it's called Reclaiming the Truth. Could psychology hold the key to moving beyond a post-truth world? Now, the first statement they make in this paper is the deliberate publication of fictitious information, hoaxes and propaganda on social media. Fake news has become one way so-called conspiracy theories are spread. Okay, well, here's a response to that. They make a link between fake news with what they are calling conspiracy theories. So let's look at the term conspiracy theory, because this is very important that people understand it. Because I get this from people who should know better. I tell them about something that's happening in their local council, and they go, "Oh, sounds like a conspiracy theory." Well, let's get to what a conspiracy theory is and where it came from and why it's psychological warfare. It's a use-all term for anything which an organisation wishes to undermine and discredit It is a tool of psychological warfare created by the intelligence services to counter evidence which contradicts state propaganda. And what the military intelligence agencies term conspiracy theories are not fake news. The term is a psychological tool to discredit revisionist or investigative journalists who give credible evidence which discredits the PR story fed to news agencies. And we have to remember a very important point. News agencies became PR agencies towards the end of the 80s. And you can read about all this in a book called Toxic Sludge is Good for You. News is PR. It's public relations. It's not news. That's why there's no journalists anymore. You get the odd one who's still allowed to come through to give the illusion that there are journalists there. So it's a blanket term used to undermine those who may have found out the truth behind events. And the term fake news is also a blanket term which can be used as a weapon. Anything can be claimed to be a hoax or fake news. Now, conspiracy theory is a completely different term and not connected with hoaxes or fake news. So what they've done there is they brought the three together. And this is what these sort of people do. They are so removed from reality, they actually think they're being clever here. And that is what psychology is all about. It's about people thinking that they're clever and that they know how the mind works. So the response to all this stuff that people should be doing is create unpredictability in their responses. Be entirely unpredictable, because this is something that psychologists cannot handle, and it will actually create the mental illness within them that they're trying to create within us.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally convinced by psychology. I think I've read some pretty wacky stuff in those areas, and there's a bit of evidence of how wacky they can be there. They're trying to bundle everyone up together and pretty much using the 4Ds on them again and putting them into a box and playing category politics with them, and again, a serious controlling of the narrative.
Absolutely, Tony. And one of their major things that they try and do now, and this is interesting because we talked last week about parapsychology, which is basically the study of the paranormal through scientific methods. And this has been completely marginalized. I had some great books from the 60s. D. Scott Rogo, Charles Tart, the parapsychologist who worked with out-of-body experiences, as did D. Scott Rogo. And this all got absorbed into the Stanford Institute later. So it's all quite interesting. But what they're doing now is, because we're in a post-truth world, they're trying to destroy religion as well. Now, I'm not talking about denominational religion here. Let's call it a higher power, belief in an order of the universe. What they need to do in order to control people completely is for people to believe that there is nothing beyond their physical bodies. They are completely entrapped in a system and they will die, and that's the end of it. And that's a huge part of psychological control. And the way that they're now denouncing the supernatural is very interesting, and they do it in this paper. Now, it says, they pose a question. They ask, could psychology hold the key to moving beyond a post-truth world? So I've responded to that with this. No. Well, psychology is based on models and theories which are stated to be behind perceived behaviour and not anything to do with truth, and that's incredibly important. So then they go on to state that the Podesta Pizzagate affair is fake news, and it's been proven to be so. And also that the revelation of paid activists bust into Austin, Texas to protest Trump was fake news. Well, we know that Soros was paying for these groups. This is all public domain stuff. So what they're doing is they're denying stuff that's in the public domain. So they are really post-truth. So psychology is proving itself to be post-truth, and it was about subversion in the first place. So it's subversion, and it's now post-truth, so it's a lie. Now, it says here, it's very interesting, actually. They go into this statement. They basically say that those two things, the Trump protests and Pizzagate, have been proven to be fake news. which is a massively sweeping statement, which they could never actually stand up and defend in a court of law, right? So it says here, right, yes, goes on to conspiracy theories and the people who believe them. So what they're trying to do now is say, well, it's a certain type of person who's a little bit unhinged, but we can help them. That's what they're trying to do here. Conspiracy theories are defined as proposed plots by powerful groups hatched in secret to achieve some sinister objective. Well, they seem to have got the wrong interpretation of conspiracy there. So let's look at what they actually should be saying. A conspiracy is an illegal act involving two or more people, not necessarily a powerful group and not necessarily for sinister objectives. So they cannot actually arrive at an accurate definition there. And then they go on, this is interesting, because this is why I like to bring things down to a simple, stripped-down legal argument, because psychology can often be taken apart because it's theoretical and it makes a lot of assumptions. So it says here, for example, one conspiracy theory supposes that Princess Diana was murdered by elements within the British establishment. Let's take this apart. Well, the verdict was unlawful killing. So involvement of elements within the British establishment cannot be ruled out, okay? So that's the first point. So they can't say that elements of the British establishment weren't involved. They can't say that with any certainty. So in a legal argument, there would be motivation and just cause for the state to be involved. Well, of course there would. So there's motivation for the state to be involved and just cause for the state to be involved, which would mean that there could be circumstantial evidence. Let's carry on with it. So the so-called establishment could therefore not be ruled out of any investigation, right? That's a fact. The establishment was never investigated, despite Diana stating that she believed she would be murdered using a car crash. She wrote that down. So that's prima facie evidence of a possible conspiracy to murder, right? And that means that their statement is completely and utterly absurd.
Yep, sounds it to me.
Let's go on to the next assumption that they make. So I think this is great, because if we beat these people, we've beaten the whole of the warfare, the psychological warfare that's being waged. So there's a great joy in actually looking at this stuff and not feeling, oh, God, this is really creepy, but thinking, wait a minute, these lot are mental midgets. And that reverses things on them, which I always think is a good idea. So he says here, another conspiracy theory here. There's another alleges that the 9/11 terrorist strikes were a false flag attack orchestrated by the American government to justify the war on terror. Okay, so we don't have to go into great detail here, but this undermines and misrepresents a huge body of evidence which would be way beyond the scope of the simplistic and superficial treatment given to it by these writers. Now, that's the first thing. You have to put that in. But the American government did use the 9/11 attacks to justify the war on terror. That's a fact. So 9/11 was the catalyst for the war on terror. So they've made another huge error there. This is how mentally lazy these people are. And one of these is a head of psychology in some university, Kent, I think. So, okay, here we go. Here we get on to point 3. Now, point 3 is always to ridicule. This is the Elvis's brain is on the moon bit, right? So yet another supposes that the American government is hiding evidence of the existence of aliens. Okay, now, this third point is always to ridicule, as I said, but most people haven't seen aliens. So to them, this is a psychological tool of ridicule, okay? Now, so that's, as I say, I bet you think Elvis is alive and living on the moon. That's what they're trying to put in there. But there is no evidence that aliens don't exist. No one can disprove the existence of aliens. They can't disprove it, right? There's no evidence that they don't exist. No one has actually conclusively proved that aliens don't exist. So they've screwed up again. You see what I'm trying to do here, Tony?
Yep.
I'm trying to use basic psychology and logic, because they go on about critical thinking in this. And these people are not doing any critical thinking.
No.
At all.
And by the sound of it, they're hoping that the people reading that piece of paper aren't doing any as well.
Well, yeah, but it's the... What gets me about it is the arrogance. Now, I don't think that the people who originally set up the Tavistock Institute, these aristocratic families, would patronise the public to this level. I really don't think they do that. You can say that they were eugenicists. They created a lot of what the present system was. But now we've gone into absolute absurdity, because what's happened is that these people who are now in charge and in these institutions are really, really stupid and arrogant. So in other words, their paradigm is falling apart. I'll carry on with another bit. It says, they weave complex, this is conspiracy theorists, you see, they weave complex narratives of mystery and intrigue, in contrast to the typically straightforward and linear narratives promoted by officialdom. This is another thing. They won't define who and what officialdom is. So it's a remote word that they cannot actually define. So, okay, let's have a look at this. Narratives behind events can be complex, and anything, unless being made clear, is mysterious. So if it's not known, it is a mystery, right? So when they're saying that they weave complex narratives of mystery and intrigue, well, most conspiracies are complex plots full of mystery and intrigue until you actually uncover the whole thing, right? So the mystery also comes in when the motives are unknown or unfathomable to the third party looking into it. This is what we just said. So straightforward and linear narratives are rarely released by news PR agencies. They are often much less credible than revised and forensic analysis. Rolling TV news is usually just third-party hearsay and constantly changes and contradicts itself. They use the term officialdom without defining what it is. This is a meaningless term, as all media information comes through third-party agents and, more often, PR companies. So public relations companies are in charge of the news. So they're saying that's officialdom. It's not. They're third-party agents of a corporation that might be working or contracted to officialdom, yeah? So the role of psychology is to assume an empirical view which cannot be challenged by those not trained into it. It is therefore an establishment-approved cult. So this is where I'm going with this. I'm now calling psychology an approved cult. So what do you think of this so far, Tony? Because I've been rambling on for a bit.
I think you're doing an excellent job of debunking it as the nonsense that it is.
Yeah, well, I just look at this stuff, and it to me, people might be going, oh, what's he getting so worked up about that for? But this is actually where it's all coming from. Everything that's coming into your life, all the crap that you have to deal with, is really coming from these remote organisations who are treating you as a lab rat. So this isn't a conspiracy theory, and it's not, oh, God, you know, you need to get out more, or, oh, you should stop listening to that stuff on the internet, you know. It's not that at all. We're going through their documents. This is not what I think. This is what they think. So it's important to know, because you can't defeat an enemy unless you understand it. And this was the art of psychological warfare. I mean, they learned all this from the Mongol Empire, really, because those guys were masters of psychological warfare. They knew how to play their enemy. So that's all they're doing. They're using this warfare against us. But this goes on anyway. But right here, it's a great... You'll love this, Tony. This is one of the most sweeping statements that you could ever possibly come across, right? It says, of course conspiracies do happen, but most conspiracy theories have no evidence to support them and are often unfalsifiable, meaning that they're so far out that you can't disprove them, right?
Yeah.
So an admission that conspiracies exist, okay, they say conspiracies exist, yeah, one or more people, or two or more people committing an illegal act or unlawful act in private is a conspiracy, right? So they're stating that what they call conspiracy theories have no evidence. That's just patently untrue, right? So then they say that they are unfalsifiable, which is untrue, as media propaganda outlets often falsify the evidence presented to discredit investigative journalists. And you could give examples there. Now, the writers do not take any form of propaganda perpetuated by establishment sources into account. So, for instance, if you threw in Operation Gladio there, you could just destroy their argument. It also discredits their previous examples, as all these have evidence outside the official narrative. That's the ones we were talking about. The existence of aliens, the murder of Diana, and 9/11. So let's carry on with this. Right, here we go. They're trying now to compare people who look at this stuff and have an alternative view to people who are going to stir up civil unrest. This is where it goes next. Yeah, it says they are therefore the perfect material for fake news stories that are designed to manipulate people and stir up social or political unrest. Now, so they're now saying that if you have a contrary view to the state, then you're an enemy of the state. That's really what they're saying here. So here we have the state narrative that knowing the truth behind events would cause political unrest. Well, this is true. It would, which is why intelligence agencies are so closely linked with media propaganda. Now it carries on. Other studies, led by this article's first author, along with Robbie Sutton, have demonstrated that people also believe conspiracy theories to the extent that they feel they would also conspire themselves. And that cognitive biases, such as the tendency to perceive intentionality and agency everywhere in the environment and belief in the paranormal, are also associated with conspiracy beliefs. So what they're doing here, they're using psychology, and they're saying that if you believe in conspiracy theories and you look at this stuff, well, that must mean you think like a conspiracy theorist, and that means maybe you're the sort of person who would conspire against the state. Can you see what they're doing here? Very blatant. Yeah. This is such disgusting psychological warfare that I think everyone should know about this. I mean, these papers are only read by a few academics, really. But they are very, very influential in the media, as we've just discussed. So every time you turn on your radio to LBC, this is the sort of crap that is being programmed into those people. Some of the presenters on there, James O'Brien and that Majid guy, they're particularly bad change agents. Okay, so what they've said there is it's ridiculous, and it's justification for draconian anti-terror laws and the prevent strategy, which means that the local council are now looking for people who may be vulnerable to extremism. We've discussed all this. It's called the prevent strategy, and they do it with the police. So all this stuff is interwoven. So they're making assumptions there that, in other words, if you believe in this, you might believe in the paranormal as well. You might believe in ghosts. You might be mentally ill. You might see things. You might hear voices. That's what they're saying here. You see where it's going, Tony?
Yeah, and I've seen the results of where this goes. I've seen it in use on people, and there's lots of other hosts that I know that have had guests on and know people that it's happened to, because once they do label you with this, you are mentally ill, and you've got a very good chance of ending up inside a mental hospital being drugged up against your will and detained. And I literally have had people here in my house who this has happened to.
Yeah, we covered that with David Compan, the NHS electrician. And the reason he did get released was because we put it out of the people's voice. And he was basically kidnapped against his will, taken to a secure mental institution. And this was for giving out a paper which said that the Queen wasn't legitimate, etc. This sort of stuff that was circulating a few years ago. He was probably ill-advised to do that, but the guy's sane. He's a normal person. He was an NHS electrician, and they followed him around with a syringe saying, "But we want to help you." And of course he panicked, and he started getting aggressive with them, because if you see someone coming after you who's got a chemical kosh and they're going to knock you out, it's really scary. So he was scared, and that's what they're doing. So they use trauma. But here we go now. We're going to get into the psychology of the conspiracy theorist. And so they say, it carries on, a range of personality and social factors such as powerlessness, authoritarianism, uncertainty, political cynicism and distrust predict the extent to which people entertain a variety of conspiracy theories. So what they're saying here is the more disempowered they feel, the more of a loser you are in the eyes of the state, the more of a misfit, the more vulnerable, the more mentally ill you are, and the more dysfunctional you are, well, those are in direct proportion to the conspiracy theories that you believe. So the biggest conspiracy theories, and people who believe them, they have to be the most disenfranchised, angry and mentally ill. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't know what my council... Go on.
Sorry, Tony?
Yeah, I'm not sure what my local council think of me then. I've recorded quite a few of the calls that I've had with them on council tax and that, and they've probably got me down as a raving nutter, so carry on, Mark.
Well, the good news there, Tony, I don't want to get too heavy with all this because these people are, as I said earlier, they think they're clever, but they're mental midgets, and they could be defeated by anybody who does a normal job. For instance, a plumber, an electrician, someone who actually does a real job could defeat these people in their argument. So they're not dangerous. But what the problem is that this is filtering down into your daily life, and there's people who are trained into it, and that's the danger. So you're dealing with remote bureaucracies like your council who are influenced by this kind of garbage, because those are the sort of people who are put in there. They're not all like that. I always found the people who were actually picking up the phones in the call centre extremely polite and easygoing, and you could tell them all this. I actually requested that one of the ladies there arrest the head of revenues and benefits because I'd had a threat of imprisonment, and I said, well, I've been threatened with kidnap by this woman. Could you and several others turn up at the town hall, call the police and make a citizen's arrest, and I'll come down there and make a statement? And she just started laughing, and I said, I'm serious. But you have to have a bit of fun with this stuff, and we did with the council tax stuff. The bad end of that is, of course, people being threatened by these bailiff companies, and I get people sending me emails, and everything I know about it is on the website. So if you're one of the people who writes in asking me about council tax or bailiffs, everything I know about it is on the website. And I can't give legal advice, obviously, because I'm not legally qualified. But if you are competent with dealing with these people, you can have success. And remember, it's all psychological warfare. When you strip this away, it's all bureaucracy. And that's really the end of it. But to carry on with this, now this is this section is very, very cynical. It says a range of personality and social factors such as powerless, authoritarianism, uncertainty, political cynicism, etc., and distrust. We've just gone through that. Now, it's an inversion to reality that, as forensic analysis without believing hearsay is in their own context empowering. So they're saying that you solve all this with critical thinking. So everything that I've responded to on there is critical thinking. So they're not using critical thinking, and I've decided to use critical thinking. And powerlessness comes from believing third parties unquestioningly. So they're saying that people who believe conspiracy theories are powerless. No, the internal power comes from knowing how this stuff works, and that's what they're trying to lead you away from. Now, the people who put this together are just trained circus animals, basically. They're Pavlovian. They've been taught to sit up and beg, and they've been taught certain responses. I don't think they realise even how subversive they actually are, because they're just programmed. I think the people behind them do. I mean, the people who we were talking about earlier on, who programmed all this stuff in, were clever. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think these people are clever. I think they're actually really stupid.
Yeah, well, when analysed the way that you have, that it's full of logical fallacies, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
It's totally there on its head. Another thing about councils, you were saying in the pod that we listened to that, no, it wasn't you, it was your guest, I forget his name, somebody Doyle.
Kevin Boyle.
Kevin Boyle. And he was saying that councils are not accountable, or it might have been you. get a bit confused, but
I think it was Kevin who brought that up, and he's gone about remote authority, which is a great term because that's what it is. And what councils have done, and everyone can relate to this, is become more and more remote. When I started off doing this sort of the council tax rebellion and it's common law, and I mean, I was looking at the papers the other day. I must have driven them absolutely mad. I mean, now they wouldn't respond to what I said. But this guy, to be fair, this guy in a council, he wrote all about common law, all about the 1992 Government Finance Act. He went into great detail about it. He didn't treat me with contempt. He actually responded, but now you don't get that. You do get treated with contempt. And this is my point, that we are allowing these people on these salaries to sit in offices, treat us with contempt, and have a phone network that you can't get through to. If they write you a letter and you write one back and they don't like it, you'll get a response from somebody else. There's no accountability. So it's all about people taking their own power back. Councils and these authorities have got to become smaller. What they're doing is they're devolving into central governments, mini central governments. That was the idea of it all. And that has to stop, because a bit like the people who wrote this, they're not competent. They're not competent to be priests. No. They're not competent to be officers. They're not competent to be public servants. They're not competent to serve because they're morally corrupt and bankrupt. So they're morally bankrupt. And if you're morally bankrupt, then you can't serve as an officer.
That's correct.
Now,
even by their own codes, they breach their own codes constantly.
Absolutely they do, because they have duties and liabilities which they don't actually admit to. And they deny. So they deny their own liabilities.
Yeah. Well, the last woman that I spoke to at my local council, she refused to tell me who she works for and says she doesn't have to tell me anything. And I said, but you're supposed to be working for me. And she kind of put the phone down at the end. You'll have to listen to the call. It's a very, very interesting call. But if anyone's out there is under the illusion or delusion that the council still works for you, you're very, very wrong. And I'll tell you, I've been trying to get you to have a chat with Lee for quite a while, Unique Lee, because Lee has done some amazing research into some of the letters that he's been getting from his DWP and his council, and the way that they're using PO boxes to create this lack of accountability. And he's actually come across some quite totally unlawful behaviour, and had some very interesting conversations with the postmaster and that about these PO boxes. It's pretty big. I'm not going to give too much away about it. I want you to talk about it, and hopefully Lee will get that information out there himself at some point. But it's very, very convoluted now. It's very hard to find out who's who and what's what, because the councils and the DWP are sending out letters from all sorts of third parties, or the third parties are sending them out, rather, as if they are from the council, and they're clearly not. There's some really pretty devious things going on there.
Yes, well, I found this out a few years ago in my court case with Waltham Forest Council. Was about a form sent out by a third party which professed to be a council form, and I won my court case because the judge agreed with my position. In other words, I didn't have to sign their form. Their form was a contract, and it also implied that there was a fine involved if you didn't answer certain questions. Well, all the council are required to know, and this does go back to the poor laws, and not the 1992 Local Government Finance Act, which they always quote. You know, that is the only thing that they quote. They don't understand where this all comes from, and that's why they don't understand why they're officers. They don't understand that they have duties. The duty of care is two ways. So they have a duty of care to us, and we have liabilities to a certain extent to them. But it's reversed to the point where they're just corporates who are demanding money from us, but we're getting nothing back. And they are unaccountable. So they're breaching their office. So if we go back to the poor laws, where all this came from, they are in error and they are acting beyond contempt, beneath contempt and beyond contempt. So they're into areas of illegality. And again, they don't understand this. Well, that's why I got them into court, and they got whipped, basically. But that's the thing. They think they're beyond the law. And so if you get them into a court, they're going to be really incompetent and arrogant.
Yeah.
So that's one good thing.
Yeah, they are like that. On the phone, it's incredible trying to have a conversation with them about anything. And if you're not fitting into their boxes, they really don't want to know you. And as Lee found out, if you try and communicate with them, what they do eventually is they'll send you a letter back, and it says they're now going to treat all further communications from you as vexatious and ignore them. So that's pretty shocking stuff.
Well, there has to be a paper trail for that, and there has to be evidence of vexatious conduct. So when they say that, and it's not true, they're digging a hole for themselves. But the only way to get around it is to get them into court, and they're trying to remove that. That's the problem. I mean, I'm talking about going back to 2009 here, but and when did I have my court case? I think it was 2012. But yeah, I think they're trying to remove all of our remedies within law. But that means that they're acting beyond the law, and they can't do that. There's something got to be enforced against these people. But with the psychological warfare that goes on and the fear, people go, oh, God, but they could take my house, or they could take this, or they can take my car, you know. Well, once people are thinking like that, then they're completely trapped. I mean, what it needs is, and what should have happened with this stuff, is that everybody stands up and you do it in cells which get bigger. And this is what they're scared of. Yeah. They're not scared of people like us talking on the radio. They're scared of people getting together and not telling anybody. And then they've got a couple of hundred people there. That's what they're scared of. They're not scared of us talking on the radio and stuff like that. They may be very annoyed about it. But we've gone really from the social engineers to the local council, but they are all the same.
Yeah,
this is where it's interlinked, isn't it, Tony? Because this is the thing, it's a big picture. And that's why I go into this psychological stuff, because that's a huge part of what this is all about, and how these people have been trained and how we defeat them. You defeat them with truth.
Yes.
Right?
It's the only way.
Let's quote from the Bible. People swear by something greater than themselves. This is about the oath. And the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to argument. And that's exactly the opposite of what these people do. They have no liability, and they will not put their names or their truth to any form of writ or deed or order.
That's right.
Which means that they are delinquent, incompetent, and should be ignored, because they are showing contempt for their office and they have no oath. And if you've got no oath, then you have no standing.
Yeah, our chat room's been really busy tonight, and we've got. I've not asked many questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the logs from tonight's chat, and we're going to address those next week, because I find if I spend too much time on the chat that I don't concentrate on the flow of where we're going, and I think it might well be a better format to bring them in on the following week, and we can discuss that beforehand, how we're going to put a show together. But I do want to read this one out from Nick Nomick now. He says, council officers only have liability while in office. PO boxes and unsigned letters make it impossible to prove they are official. So,
exactly, yeah, because what they've done is they've taken away part of the liability with the address, because there has to be a name and address of service. Yeah, well, that's what they're doing. Yes, it's just becoming more and more remote, but they're hiding in these sort of buildings where they're hiding in bunkers, basically. I mean, you can't even have access to these people anymore. You can't go up to the town. You used to be able to go to the town hall and say, which room's this one? Oh, it's at that house over. It's at Juniper House. It's at the Jupiter House or whatever. It's down the road. It's 196 High Street. It's in there, room 105. You can't do that anymore.
No.
And I suppose it all depends how much people are dependent on the council. It's a big problem, and you'll find that people are always moaning about the council. When I tried to do this, Tony, I spent ages trying to wake people up to it, get them on board. Okay, let's all stop paying council tax. Okay, who's left? Oh, just me then. I'm the one getting my car clamped. I'm the one getting taken to court. I'm the one getting served bankruptcy positions, and everyone else pussied out, basically. So that tells you everything you need to know. People, if they want to do something, they have to do it by your oath,
Yeah, eventually they was conquered either by the fear or the sheer amount of aggro that you have to go through in order to take this on, one or the other. I can't judge them on that. Mithrin's saying, is this leadership beyond authority? Well, I think we pretty much said that, yeah, it is, haven't we?
Of course it is, yeah. Of course. But leadership beyond authority, what does that mean? The point is you can't lead beyond authority. This is what they're taught to do. But they're taught to... It's basically be audacious. That's what they tell them. Be audacious within your office, but they're not in an office. So they're just being arrogant, contemptible people. And it all comes back to the natural system of law in the end. And a lot of this stuff is contained in biblical texts and ancient texts. A lot of this stuff was known about a long time ago, and to keep people from straying into the complete tyranny that they're in now, there was a very good way of doing it, which, you sway your allegiance to something, a higher power. And this is what, again, brings us back to this psychological stuff, because they're saying that there isn't one. There's no higher power. There's no supernatural. There's the state, and that's it, which is communism. Okay, so they're saying that there is no higher power. You will not be able to use any higher power over us. We are the only authority. And what these people are inwardly scared of is supernatural power, because they've wiped it out of existence. Now, the people who set all this up knew very well that all that stuff worked. Why do you think we had remote viewers and all this sort of stuff work? Why do you think the police still use psychics, and this still goes on? Well, because it might work. Why do you think people use dowsing? Why do you think water companies still douse? And all this stuff, psychologists will say, oh, that's just superstition. It's not real. We're just biological machines. Well, the people who are writing this crap have become biological machines. So they are powerless.
It's every bit as real.
They have no internal power.
Sorry,
Tony.
Sorry there. You're having a few dropouts, and I thought you'd stopped. Sorry. Where was I going? Yeah, it's every bit as real as psychology, which is just, as you said, a theoretical. I don't know. I don't want to call it a science, but whatever it is.
It's a pseudoscience.
Yeah, a pseudoscience. Yeah, that's built a huge industry, which we could do a whole show about, but I'd rather not, because many people have, and there's lots out there on it. But psychology has built a huge industry for the pharmaceutical company, and that really ought to be looked into by anyone that's never gone into that from a critical point of view.
Absolutely. I mean, I do enjoy going through these papers now, because they do empower you once you get to know how this stuff works. Here we go. Let's just have a look at a bit more of this, because it's incredibly funny as they're going down. It's very insidious, but as I said, these people are mental midgets. It says, also, people are generally uncomfortable feeling that they are sheep, dutifully following the orders of officialdom, and they like to feel that they can uncover the truth about events that affect their lives. So what a patronising statement. They like to feel that they can uncover the truth. So it's about feelings, is it? So uncovering the truth is about the way you feel. No, it's not.
Yeah, emotion over logic again.
Exactly. So there's, and they're also saying, well, none of us want to feel like sheep. You see what I mean? They're sort of appealing to that. Oh, well, none of us really want to feel like sheep, do we? So it's so what they're saying is like, so uncovering the truth. Yeah, as we said, it's got nothing to do with the way people feel. The truth is the truth, or it's not the truth. It has to be proved with or without the absence of fact. So if it's without the absence of fact, so if it's without fact, then it cannot be proven as truth. So by their own arguments, they're using logical fallacies, as you say, and they're being completely illogical. And it's patronising. It says more about the authors who are writing this stuff, really. And that they're implying that the population are not competent enough to step outside or question a constructive narrative. And it carries on. Other research, for example, Benjamin Lee's recent study, suggests that people sometimes communicate conspiracy theories for more politically motivated reasons, such as to incite fear and distrust of other social groups. Oh, wait a minute. I think I know someone else who does that, Tony.
Yep.
Isn't that what military intelligence do?
I think so, Mark.
And there's no evidence cited that this is the case as far as the more thinking public are concerned. But they just quoted what their puppet masters are actually doing. So that's quite interesting. Now it carries on. Further studies have linked climate change conspiracy theories with reduced intentions to engage in climate-friendly behaviour. Right, okay. So there's no evidence cited. And those who question the theory of global warming or anthropological climate change conspiracy are most often committed environmentalists, which is why they investigate the matter. So the people who really do care about the planet have investigated the global warming hoax, right?
Yep.
I went to a meeting of scientists with them. One of them was the co-founder of Greenpeace, right? Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. He wrote a book, Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, how the environmental movement was hijacked by this corporate structure. That's what his book's about. So that's another thing to throw back at them. So in other words, they're saying that people who deny that climate change is real, that, well, anthropological global warming climate change, they won't be as friendly to the environment. So again, it's about attacking people who are a threat to corporates. That's all they're doing. They're saying, well, you know, so you think it's okay to litter the planet, do you? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the global corporate governance, which is being inflicted and killing people and killing the elderly, with all this green taxation, and there's much more to come, and getting rid of cars and people's ability to actually go and visit each other is a bad thing. Oh, that makes me an enemy of the state and I'm an anti-environmental. Well, I've just given you an example of an environmentalist who's committed to environmentalism, who knows that this thing is a complete and utter fake and a hoax. So ClimateGate and Al Gore, got to remember that, along with the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in case people didn't know, which supplies all this data to the UN for the COP21. I've read the last document was AR5, I think, which is basically just models and projections of what may happen sometime in the future, which never does. So, again, this disinfo. It's just disinfo with examples of empirically disproved conspiracy theories which are used against the public for financial gain and global governance and control. So this conspiracy is provably true and in the public domain. Right. Then they go on to anti-vaccine conspiracy theories with reduced vaccination intentions. Okay. So those who have evidence of vaccine damage and have read medical reports from doctors not co-opted by the industry would logically reject vaccine propaganda. Right.
Yep.
And it goes on. And conspiracy theories in the workplace with reduced intentions to stay in one's job. Here we go. So now, these are real dropouts. They can't even keep a job, these conspiracy theorists, and they upset everybody and they get sacked. You know, they're not very good, are they? So what they're saying is, if you don't like those in your workplace, you shouldn't leave. Basically, that's what they're saying. So if you don't like your job, you shouldn't leave. Right? So the authors admit that so-called conspiracy theories could destabilise society. So that's what they're getting to. They're getting to the fact that if people wake up to this stuff, society would be destabilised. And in the eyes of the social engineers, that is not a good thing, because these people are control freaks and they have our best interests at heart. So what do you think, Tony?
Well, I think... I don't know. I think it's one of them things that we've all got to learn to work with this information and make something for ourselves out of it. I'm waffling on a little bit here because I was reading the chat and taking a few questions, so that's why I don't normally do it. But the social engineering, that's something we could kind of have an old show about, and neural linguistic programming, or NLP, which we haven't spoken about yet, is another part of this, obviously. And I think you're doing a good job of exposing there what it is that they're trying to get across, rather than what the actual truth of the situation is. One of the things that you touched on a couple of times is the corporation, and we'll go back to that, because something that I think is really important with this is that people understand the corporation, what it actually is. And its number one legal requirement to make money. Sorry for repeating myself, all those that have heard it before. But when you understand that your country as a whole is a corporation, the UK is, each of your political parties, your government is, and your police are all corporations, your schools and your councils, and you're even a corporation yourself. You was made that way via your birth certificate, and that is your number one responsibility. It's to make money. Now, you can understand all of the things that you didn't understand before about why the human element has gone out of anything, why no one cares about anyone for any real reason anymore, and why it's been encouraged to be that way. It's because we live in a corporate world. We don't live in a world of men and women anymore. And I think it's an extremely important thing to get across to people.
Yes, of course. I mean, things like high taxes, unfair competition, and economic ruin, controlling raw materials, and organised education, all these things, this power grid is very, very important to the state, because the whole idea of this in the first place was that we could actually partake in commerce. And the idea of all that stuff that we talked about, you and your legal fiction, all that stuff, is that it's really taking you away. Well, this is interesting, actually, because it's not taking you away from it. It's making an assumption that you're property. So what people then do is identify themselves as the property. But you're not property, because you can't be property and you can't own property.
Okay.
All as you have is consciousness. And your consciousness is just the only steady thing you've got. Everything else is just ethereal. It's not going to be around. It's what they're trying to do. The thing is that, as I said with the birth certificate thing, you've got to see both sides of what that's about. Because in order to partake in this present system that's been created by greed and usury, you have to be property to be traded. But it doesn't mean you are property. But I think this stuff is much worse, Tony, because it's like battery farming. This psychological warfare is beyond the incorporation of you. I mean, there's black magic in that incorporation because of the blood bond, all that stuff we discussed, the Guthrie card. All this stuff goes back to ancient black magic controlled by the magician through the blood, which makes the person the property, makes the person the property of the state or the magician. So that stuff is hard to get your head around. But when you get your head around it, it's actually it's child's play compared to what this stuff is, because this is a really sinister web. With that, all they're doing is saying, yeah, to make a commercial transaction, you've got to be this, you've got to be property. Okay, well, I'm not property, but my name's property because my parents signed it away, and you trade on the name, and I trade with that name. That's not necessarily that evil. There's a black magic element to it, which I think is where it came from. But it's not something that's going to ruin every part of your conscious daily life, whereas psychological subversion and the creation of artificial wombs, which is a thing they go on about a lot, they assume that people go into artificial wombs. There's many reasons why people do that. It could be because they feel insecure or because they want to escape. But what they do is they traumatize people through this psychological warfare, so they need artificial wombs. Then they create the artificial wombs which people escape to, which is the stuff they see on the TV. And what you were talking about earlier, oh, the fun's gone out of sport because it's all corporate or it's personality driven, it's not about sport anymore, all the rest of it. So what they've done is that they've sucked the joy out of everything. So people need more and more artificial wombs to retreat into. And that's really where things can start bordering on severe mental illness, because people are withdrawing from reality or a perceived reality. Yeah. So that's to me a very, very important part of what this is about.
Yeah, I get you. I follow that. And I've heard you talking about us not being able to be property before, and it's kind of twigged a bit of conversation in my head regarding the Carl Lentz case. And I know some of our listeners will be familiar with the Carl Lentz case, and he basically spent 6 years fighting the state to get his child back as his property. That's what he claimed it as. And it did cause a lot of consternation that he did it that way. But I want to know how we would kind of simplify that situation with what you just said about property.
Well, he'd a genius, because what he did was identify the problem and used it. So, in other words, he used the state's definition of property back against the state, as far as I can understand. So, in other words, say your child is going to get taken into custody, or the child's going to be taken. The child says, I'm his property. And you say, you said to the person, are you my property? And the person says back, yes, I'm your property. And that is subverting the assumption of the state, that you are the state's property. And it's about trespass and trespass on rights. So his stuff is brilliant. The reason he's so brilliant is because it's so simple. And all remedies in law are simple.
Yes.
And there's a certain genius to that approach. It's absolutely fantastic, yeah.
I've been learning a little bit about that lately, and maybe we'll go there at some stage in the future. But Sibboleth words, I don't know whether you know anything about them. We've not spoken about them before, but they're the key to the kingdom of the court, understanding and knowing the Sibboleth words that they use.
Well, we could talk about that. I may have to catch up a bit on that and look into it, but I know certain parts of this story, and really a lot of it comes down to natural law and truth, because those are still the basis of what our system of law should be about. We've talked about the system of admiralty, about the county court, the way the county court is a court of salvage, the way the county court is a court of privateers. It's privateers engaging in unlawful salvage. That's what's happened with the county court. It's become unlawful because they are using deeds, documents, writs, and summonses which are created for corporate gain and just theft by people within the county court. So they're creating fake documents. These are criminal offences.
For sure.
So it takes us back to the oath again. That's why it's very important. I think we should go back to swearing oaths of allegiance, because it means that you are your word. Your word is your bond. If your word is not your bond, then you get corruption, then you get tyranny, then you get what we've got now. The reason we're at this stage, and you've got this hideous situation of these unregulated bailiff companies stealing people's property, going to the county court, getting the people in the county court to write out fake warrants of possession, and the police joining in with it, is because they are not on their oaths, or they haven't taken oaths. And all this goes back to all this stuff when Constable, are you on your oath today, and all this stuff. I mean, it's a bit comedic now in a way, but it's actually very, very serious, because all of these officials should be under oath. If you're not under oath, then you can't be in office.
That's right. They're masquerading as third-party interlopers, and worse than that, they're actually deceiving
well, privateers.
you.
They're acting as pirates or privateers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Where was I going with that? Right, okay, yeah. Because the reason why I mentioned the Sibboleth words and the courts was because it's part of controlling a narrative, but a different narrative. This is the narrative of the legal world that's controlled by these words that don't mean what you think they mean. They never taught you in school might mean something else. And the word A, it turns out, can be the difference between you winning or losing a case. Or in the case of Carl Lentz with his son, it was the difference between him having his son returned to him and not having it returned to him. It was a judge that was particularly impressed with Carl's approach in the court, and he was obviously sympathetic to the fact that he wanted to be with his son. And he said something to Carl after one of the trials. He said, Carl, you're never going to win this until you learn what it is to be a man. And it took Carl Lentz another 2 years to work out what that judge meant by doing all of his research into his legal books and whatever. And it turns out that if you present yourself as a man, the word a means none. So now whenever you hear Carl Lentz talk about himself or his appearance in court, it will be I man, not a man.
Yes, Tony, I used that. I used a man. I a man. I used that several years ago when I wrote a commercial affidavit to JBW bailiffs, or their city solicitor, who wanted to sue me because I may have caused them loss of earnings for an article I wrote, telling people not to pay them. My article is still there. That commercial affidavit was never responded or rebutted by the city lawyer who threatened me. I mean, I'll have to read it out one day, Tony. I found it the other day. It's hilarious. But you're looking at people who are arrogant, who are floundering, you know. But I don't know, as far as the family courts go in this country, whether the common law can be brought into family courts anymore. I'd like to know more on that, on how it's going, because they're held. There's courts of protection and private courts, and that's a totally different thing. I suppose it depends on your ability to get your case where it should be. And I don't know the exact circumstances of his cases, but I've listened to a lot of his stuff, but not for a while. And it's extremely powerful. And I know somebody up in Blackpool who was part of an organisation that took on the Child Support Agency. And he used the Carl Lentz approach in court, and it was very successful.
Yeah,
That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, people should check out his more recent work, because I think a lot of people have forgotten about him since he won that case, but he's been travelling around to different countries and taking on certain cases and winning them all, from what I can make of it, and winning his expenses as well for doing the travelling. What I'd
like to do is get into a court with him, see what happens. That would be really, really interesting.
Well, what I'd like to do is get him onto a show, and I'm actually working on that, because I do know someone that knows Dean Clifford pretty well, and I know Dean knows Carl. So I've been working on this for a little while, but hopefully we're going to get something sorted out, because I do believe he's got the keys to many kingdoms. But what he doesn't want to do is he doesn't want to publicly give out some of his information, because from what I can make of it, he's got some information there that it shouldn't be in the wrong hands. Let's just say people could go out there and do some pretty awful things with that information and be pretty much untouchable by the law as a result of it. So
that's a possibility, but I would say that there's more chance of people misinterpreting things, getting it wrong and messing up, which is what happened with a lot of this Freeman stuff. That turned out pretty disastrous for some people, but there's a small group who were using, Carl Lentz stuff, and along with Bill Thornton, because his knowledge of court procedure is excellent. And I really like his stuff because it's very, very slow, and then the penny drops. Then it's very slow, very slow, very slow, then a penny drops. And that's a bit like, it's a bit like Zen Buddhism or something. That it's the thing is with this law is that things just resonate with you. Go, oh, that's it. So there is a real kind of meaningful substance to natural law and common law, really. But common law is not quite the same as natural law, obviously, but natural law and the adherence to certain principles within natural law, and the ability to give your oath and know what that means puts you at an advantage, and that's very, very important to what we're up against. And I would just think that that's a very good thing for people to remember. So just to repeat that, it was Hebrews 6:16. People swear by something greater than themselves, and the oath confirms what is said and puts an end to argument. And that's what these people are doing. They're creating controversy and argument and dissent. And the oath and the truth removes the argument and the dissent.
So they probably needed to do this more about this on another show, but it's come up a couple of times. You mentioned affidavit. That is an oath, is it not? A sworn oath that is taken extremely seriously by a court?
Yes, because the consequences of perjury under oath are quite serious in a Crown Court and also in any other court, really. It means you're showing contempt. And also you're showing contempt for God, because you're meant to be swearing an oath on your beliefs, on everything that you believe in, whether you believe in a God or several gods, whatever you believe in, you're swearing an oath to a higher power. And that's what they're trying to remove by, say, the Royal Courts of Justice years ago. I went in, I said, I've got an affidavit, say we don't take affidavits. Now, the masters downstairs would not even have known that. We go, what do you mean they don't take affidavits? It's a court of law. Right? They would have been doing that. But the bureaucrats upstairs are going, we don't take affidavits. What you have is a witness statement. A witness. So you're a third party. You're an uninvolved third party. You're a witness. Well, that's absolutely no good when you come into their system. It means that you are just easily swept aside, because it means what you've done is you've given up all your rights. Because the affidavit is your statement of absolute truth, which has to be rebutted point by point, otherwise it stands in law. Which is why when I sent an affidavit to that lawyer for that bailiff company, I signed it with a barrister in Walthamstow. And he said to me, where did you learn all this? And I said, well, I've been doing a bit of research and I believe it all to be absolutely sound and the truth. And that's why I want to sign it. And he said, it's very, very good. But you don't need to put so many points in. I said, well, the reason we've done that is there's at least 40 points in there which they have to rebut. how much is that going to cost them? And he said, probably about $5,000. So that's why you do it. You do it to drain the opponent.
Yeah.
Because they're doing that to you.
Oh, absolutely.
They're draining you. So you do it back to them.
Yeah, they will drain every resource from you and all your emotions and everything else. Mark, this has been pretty exceptional. I've really enjoyed it. And
Thanks, Tony.
thank you so much to everybody that's been listening out there. I know we've had a lot more people listening tonight and a lot of new ones. Thanks for coming to autonomousmedia.net. You should check out more shows here. You should also go to landofthefree.co.uk to check
Hang on,
out...
Tony. No, windorsontheworld.net.
Yeah, and I was going to do that one after, mate.
Oh, right.
Because a lot of the stuff you referred to earlier comes from Land of the Free.
It's an old site, that, and it's a bit creaky now, but there's some great information on there, yeah.
Yeah, I still like to have a look round on there. So,
Oh, yeah, it's still getting quite a lot of hits, but we've transferred most of the stuff. But, yeah, all the stuff on council tax is on there, and also Windows on the World.